Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations here at SBAMP, and we're kicking off Thanksgiving week and Small Business Saturday week. And we're going to welcome one of our new members, Lion Bear Ventures. So, welcome to the Lion Bear Venture team. All right, so Brian, it is Thanksgiving on Thursday and it is Small Business Saturday this coming Saturday. I might have started my Small Business Saturday shopping a little early, hitting up a few of my favorite stores, but why don't you talk to us about the importance of this day?
Yeah, this is a really important day for smaller retailers. The It kicks off the season that what makes or breaks their whole year for many of them. And so that's why it's particularly important that if you do value small businesses, if you do value smaller retailers in particular, which have really, I would say, of all small businesses, the ones most at risk with all the changes that have happened in the world over the last 20 years or so, it's really important to go out of your way to support them. So um, please do consider making that part of your budget this year. About 99% of all businesses in Michigan are small businesses, and it is literally the main economic infrastructure, jobs and economic infrastructure for communities. About half of, actually a little more than half of all jobs, about 51% of all jobs in Michigan come from businesses with fewer than 100 employees. So this is it's not the sort of thing like, oh, these, nice to have small businesses. No, it's an imperative. We absolutely must in order to have strong, healthy, economically healthy communities. And this is a great time for retailers in particular, one segment of the small business community, to get some help and support. Most are online, and some are, some aren't. Sometimes it's buying things, sometimes it's gift certificates. It could be um, a whole host of things. Actually, there's a lot of great tourism industry in Michigan. So getting experiences as gifts for other people, another great idea as well. So please do consider. You don't, of course, have to wait until Saturday, but Saturday is just kind of a rallying cry, if you will. It's that point where we really try to make sure that people do go out of their way to support these entrepreneurs that do so much to make your community where you live smaller or smart, healthier and stronger, I should say.
I'll just add one thing to that. So for every $100 spent at a local business, about $68 stays in that community. And for some big box stores, it's only about $40 to $43 that stay. So these are the people that support our kids' schools and soccer teams, and as Brian said, to employ people at our community. So have a lot of fun and go out and spend your money wisely this holiday season. All right, so Brian, you've been doing a lot of thinking and you've actually done a couple of videos on AI recently. We've been talking about it a lot here at SBAM too. But there's some AI companies who are measured against industry benchmarks who are trying to keep up and catch up with ChatGPT. So what's going on in this industry and who's making waves?
Well, ChatGPT kind of got out in front of everybody else, and so that was the one that the because it was first out of the blocks, it has now about 800 million users, 800 million users. It's kind of um, mind-boggling to think about those types of numbers. But since then, there's so many other competitors that have come out of the market that we've talked about, and there are certain benchmarks. And these benchmarks, they measure things like logic, knowledge, math, image recognition, and the one that kind of in the beginning was seemed to be most at risk. So ChatGPT comes out, and then there was a Chinese AI tool that was particularly effective as well that came out around that same time. And then so the question was, what do you need Google for? Google would give you all of these, websites that you could sift through, and AI systems are getting better and better at just serving up an answer. Although I will say that you definitely need to continue to question the answers. And and go back and forth with AI tools because they're trying to be efficient. They bring an answer that they find credible that quickly and not necessarily the best answer to your questions if you're using it like Google. But it did pose a question like, what is Google is even going to be necessary in the future? So that company, the company that owns Google, which is called Alphabet, the they have an AI system called Gemini, and Gemini 3 just came out, and they published these benchmark tests at the same time and demonstrated a that they had made some huge gains and actually performed well against better actually than ChatGPT and other competitors that have sprung up since then. So it's kind of like a race, these different companies trying to get better and better at what they do. And so as the adoption continues to increase, by the way, I typed out some of the answers or some of the numbers. Um, they are now, let's see, Google's AI system Gemini is up to 650 million monthly users. And that's pretty big. That other ChatGPT is actually 800 million weekly users. And so the frequency that people use is one of the benchmarks, monthly or weekly. Many people, of course, using them daily, but Gemini and Google just making um, some huge strides. So this is something you'll hear us continue to talk about. If there's one thing I'm pretty concerned with is that many small businesses that don't necessarily see this as relevant or maybe aren't thinking through how the changes in the way that people are accessing information and utilizing AI to do tasks that maybe before they hired out or outsourced these or hired employees for, or bought goods and services for, or software for, all these different things that it probably is going to affect your business in some way, and you ought to be really thinking about it and trying to get ahead of it, driving how it affects you rather than being driven, um, and maybe even driven right out of business if you're not careful. So this is an issue that we're going to stay right on top of and try to just continue to ramp up programming around to with an encouragement. You don't have to be a tech expert on these things that you can just kind of screw around with them and learn how to use them and maybe and who knows how far you could take it or what it mean for your business. But um, there's one called Perplexity. There's Copilot that comes off around with Microsoft. We actually at SBM use Copilot for a lot of things because you can kind of cordon it off in terms of deciding it takes information in, but it doesn't let information out because it's integrated. But maybe not quite as good as some of the other as the other tools. So lots of tools in the toolbox, but clearly Gemini making some huge strides.
All right, well, thanks for that update. So the Wall Street Journal, they analyzed thousands of earnings calls through November, and issued a report. So what insights did that reveal?
They were really trying to figure out what executives of larger companies, how they were feeling about tariffs in particular, because starting out the year, there was massive concerns about the impact that tariffs would have, and then big estimates on what the overall costs would be on it. And so the overall characterization was that executives were more optimistic today, that they had found ways to kind of incorporate, maybe change practices, change how things are sourced from one country instead of another country to minimize the overall impact. Lots of changes have been made clearly, but the overall impact being less than what was expected. So companies paid out about 12% of import values as tariffs, and that's about 10% percentage points higher than what it was before the tariffs went into effect. So clearly costs have gone up. So why the optimism? Because it didn't go up as much as what the executives had originally assumed. Just as an example, looking at Ford, which, local example here, Ford cut its tariff impact estimate from 2 billion to 1 billion. Now, 1 billion is still a big number, right? I mean, it's not the sort of thing where If they had originally estimated it at 1 billion, they probably wouldn't be feeling so optimistic about it today, but they originally assumed or estimated the tariff impact at 2 billion. And so we're feeling more confident that it didn't come close to their worst case scenario. So um, that's um, that's probably I'd say overall, decent news, but it's decent news among really a lot of concerning economic news overall. We're going to cover some of that in our data report at the end of the small business briefing. But that's I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to call it a silver lining because it costs going up for sure with it, but just not as bad as what people were thinking.
All right, let's kind of switch gears here and talk about kind of the maybe the end of an era or the beginning of the end of an era. The last penny has been struck. So what does this mean for transactions going forward?
Yeah, so if you have cash transactions, nothing changes immediately. I mean, but the U.S. government is not making pennies anymore. So finding pennies, coming across pennies, and having them for making change presumably will get increasingly difficult over the course of the coming years because there just will be no new pennies put into circulation. So I don't think there'll be any immediate change, but to the extent that people are buying things with credit cards or buying things with um, ATM or automatic transactions, of course, the absence of pennies won't matter one bit. But to the extent that you are paying with cash, presumably at some point, uh, the way that prices are rounded instead of being rounded to the nearest penny, which they are, like you put a sales tax on something, it comes out with a fraction and you round it gets rounded to the penny. Presumably in the future it'd have to be rounded to the nickel. But that would only be for in cash transactions. And I know those are getting a little more scarce than they used to be, at least in the US, more scarce in terms of cash transactions. So, but it is the end of an era. It is, I was, when I saw this and it had been talked about for a long time, felt a certain kind of way about it. I still pick up pennies. If I see a penny on the ground, I still pick it up. I don't know why. And I stick it in a jar and then it's in the jar. And then once the jar fills up with just change, I eventually make it, somewhere to, bring it in and deposit somewhere, but it could sit for literally years there. So, it's one of those things where there's a certain amount of nostalgia to it, but from a practical standpoint, I think with the U.S. Treasury determined that it costs about 4 or 5 cents to make every penny, that the overall kind of proposition of it being so expensive to accommodate such a small unit of transaction, it just made what on its face seems to be a pretty logical decision.
My sixth grader also had some feelings about it, Brian. He likes coins, a little bit of a coin collector, and so he's decided he needs to get his hands on one of the last run so he can hold on to it for generations, he said. So we'll see if he's
Very
successful
good.
or
No,
not.
that's good. I collect old things also, including coins. But when I was a coin collector, when I was a kid, it wasn't like baseball cards where you'd want to get the cards that had the most value. It wasn't like that for me. There were certain ones that I thought looked neat. And so I would collect the ones that looked neat. I loved the wheatback pennies. And so anytime I found one, I would keep it. And so I do have lots and lots of wheatback pennies. Maybe that's why the government had to make more pennies all the time because so many of us were hoarding them
You're hoarding
they were
them, yes.
coming in.
Well, when people run out of pennies, maybe they'll see if you can lend them one. All right, let's get into today's Data Monday report.
All right, it has been a while since we've done one, and the reason it's been a while since we've done one is because we haven't had data when the government was shut down. It put them behind on creating these data reports. So the first thing is the jobs report, and it's going to be December before we see another one of or it'll be the December numbers before we see another one of these that we'll get in January. The but this report just goes through September. So October and November will be the next one up. So this report is no, I'm sorry, this goes through October, but November, December will be combined. The You see if you look at at these reports or at these numbers, you see it's settled down to this lower number and then it really dropped down just slivers in some of these months this year. At 119,000 to the positive, this report was actually a little bit better than what original estimates were. But still, just looking at this trend, you get a picture of just overall softening in the jobs numbers. Now, if you separate out those by category, we're going to look at it two different ways. The first is just the one that grew the most on the top and the one that contracted the most on the bottom. You'll see both were service categories, so transportation and warehousing on the bottom. And look at business and professional services, also the number two biggest loser. And then the two bigger ones up here, though, leisure and hospitality and education and health services. Education and health services is often one that's on the top, but the leisure and hospitality did really seem to, in the latter half of this year, really hit some growth. This is separating out the same data, just separating it out based on services versus goods producing. And you'll see construction was up, manufacturing down in terms of goods producing, and then in services we'd already talked about in that last slide. Now looking at the jobs numbers by percentage, I wanted to show it in this the Charlie Bilio makes these graphs and oftentimes takes information and puts them in more interesting formats or contexts. We don't usually look at payroll growth as a percentage. But what was being showed here is at 0.8% payroll growth year over year. It's at a point where, and each time when you saw that in the past, it did point to a recession. Now the difference here potentially is that we're having such a productivity revolution where you might be able to get economic growth while employment is contracting with artificial intelligence, but in particular. But I thought that was worth looking at or sharing. Punchline of this, I think, behind the pictures there. But this is labor force participation rate among 25 to 54-year-olds, so prime labor force. This is one I always show every month or every month that it's been available. 83.7%. So not as high as it's ever been, but not too far off that high. So that was pretty good news. And then looking at the overall labor force participation at the top, you see among men, the labor force participation rate, and then or I'm sorry, at the top is the average among everybody, 62.4%. Among men at 67.8 and women at 57.4. Everything really holding pretty steady overall. No big changes in labor force participation. And then looking at unemployment, you see that it is creeping up. And again, it's not, remember when I talked about Michigan's unemployment, this is the national, but talking about Michigan's unemployment rate creeping up and now one of the highest in the country. There was never any one month where it just jumped up and you're like, man, what's going on? It was just creeping up little by little. That's what we see happening in the whole country now, and up to 4.4. Again, historically not particularly high, but it's the trend that is more concerning here. And then looking at unemployment, those that are either temporarily laid off or those that are permanently laid off. And again, you see that's the blue line that you see pretty consistently trending upward, and those are permanent layoffs. There's just so many changes that are happening in our economy right now. The permanent layoffs is something that is continuing to rise. And then the last thing here is the University of Michigan does the National Consumer Sentiment but also consumer expectations and their description of current economic conditions. But looking at the sentiment, which is in blue, um, it's uh, it's it's pretty low. It's not a record low, but it's pretty darn close to as low as it's been. So consumer sentiment is low. And that's something, the reason that I share that one in particular every month is just because the way consumers are feeling will drive what happens in the economy in the future. American consumers are remarkably resilient, like extraordinarily resilient. And yet, when it gets low, if it stays low like that, it will impact the overall behavior of consumers, which um, would point to tougher economic times. So I'd say the overall thought here is that just things look weaker, and that's not a big surprise. But the big difference now compared to say uh, 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, it always seems like there was crosswinds before where it's like, well, some things look really strong and some things look like they're struggling. And it was hard to tell what's happening. Right now, you just get the sense that everything's just slowing a bit. It's not an every indicator across the board, but overall, just things look slower. And that matches what we pick up where we are picking up anecdotally um, in our interactions with membership as well. So all the more reason to get out there on Small Business Saturday and support your local small businesses and make sure that they're going to be there in your community and around for a long time.
All right. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate you. We hope you have a great week and a very happy Thanksgiving. And we will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
See you next Monday.